You know, maybe sometimes baby steps are better than taking no steps at all. So, but I believe if I'm elected, the first thing is starting with comprehensive TIF reform.
My follow-up has to do with, you referred to blighted areas and affordable housing. Are you equating the two in terms of where they need to be, or would you be an advocate or a supporter of affordable housing even in well-to-do areas?
Well, that's a good point. I think what you have to do is have a real concrete definition of what blight actually means. We've used a pretty flexible definition. So I think that's one element of TIF reform that I think we have to address, which is what are we actually using that money for? What's blight actually mean? Where are we going to apply that, and what neighborhoods does that apply to? Does it just mean in areas of high levels of concentrated poverty, or does it also apply to the 47th Ward? I mean, this is a discussion that we as a city and as a community need to have.
All right, thank you. And now Mr. Jacks to wrap up this section.
So, you know, I like affordable housing. I feel that, you know, it creates diversity for the community, and it gives people closer access to their jobs. And I think TIFs, you know, definitely connect with the purpose of affordable housing. They promote economic and community development. However, you know, I do not support TIF funds being used outside their individual districts, which this ordinance would do. It would, you know, essentially create a TIF fund for TIF funds, as a mayor referred to. And I feel that that's not the best idea, especially since TIFs are not transparent, you know, as we all discussed earlier. You know, I would definitely be in favor of, you know, using TIF funds for affordable housing within their own individual districts. I think that definitely falls in line with the purpose of TIF funds. But until there's any improvement in TIF transparency, you know, TIF reform, I feel I'd be very hesitant to vote for this ordinance. So.
Are there any other ideas then, without this ordinance, in terms of how you would support affordable housing in the ward?
Yeah, so I would definitely be in favor of supporting affordable housing through the use of TIFs within their own districts in the ward.
But not through this ordinance?
Correct, because I do not want TIF funds, you know, from this ward to go outside the ward, outside their own individual districts.
Okay. Now, a notice to our timekeepers, we're now moving on to the lightning round. These are questions that were pre-approved and submitted by many of you, and the organizations will withdraw them out randomly here, and then each candidate will have 1 minute to respond, and you should just warn us when there are 30 seconds remaining. So the first question, and the response for this question will be Mr. Jacks, Mr. Pawar, Mr. O'Donnell, then Mr. Reichel. We go to question number 16. What would you like to see happen in the Western Avenue South TIF district, which covers 254 acres and has been projected to generate funds in excess of $200 million over its life? Mr. Jacks, 1 minute.
Sure. So I think this TIF area is great. You know, there's a lot of green space. I feel like green space has a lot of value. You know, you have it promotes, you know, walking, biking, just people being outside and in their community. So I think it promotes community engagement. And for this area, you know, there's some area for development, but I really like the idea of keeping green space there. If there were to be any development, you know, I realize that the alderman does not have, you know, all the answers, and I really would, you know, be in favor of working with community organizations and the residents in the area and in the ward to ensure that whatever decision is being made for that that TIF district is something that the community wants, and that there's a transparent process for how that decision is made.
Thank you. Mr. Pawar.
I took a look at the TIF statements for the Western Avenue South TIF, and it looks like what they want to use the money for is infrastructure upgrades at Lane. They want to develop mixed-use commercial property, and along with real affordable housing. I think what we have to do as a community, and again, it goes back to this engagement, is, you know, we don't know what is the market going to bear. If we build something there, is someone going to buy it? You know, what we're seeing in this ward is there's dozens of empty storefronts. How many homes have been built in communities where they're still sitting empty? So what I want to do is come back to you, the community, through this ward council, hold a series of meetings so that we can avoid another debacle like the 07 eminent domain issue in the Western Avenue North TIF, and work with you to figure out what it is that you want. These are our dollars. This is our space. We should have a say in what happens with it.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. O'Donnell.
50-some years ago, we built an overpass for Riverview Park, and it's still there, and it needs to be removed. And that area could be developed. That Six Corners could be one of the real. It could be Lincoln Square. It could be whatever we want it to be. And I'd like to turn that into something really vital in this ward. So I think this is actually an example where you have a blighted area that if we do this right, we don't want to do a Damon, Elston, Fullerton Six Corners. We want to do one, all those familiar with that. We want to do one that's not overbuilt. We want to do one that has green space. But I think that this is one of those exciting areas in the ward that if we do this right, we could really make this an attractive commercial area and increase access to an area that's been neglected for many years because of that overpass.
So using the funds specifically to demolish the overpass and work with some of the plans that have been put together.
The cityscape for that area.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Reich.
Well, again, if and when I become alderman, we are going to institute a participatory budget process so that we'll get the most people involved as humanly possible in the decision-making process as far as how we're going to spend those funds. I do like a lot of the ideas I've heard the other candidates talk about, including removing that overpass, which is kind of an eyesore and an artificial division there in that community. Also spending on lane tech infrastructure upgrades. I'd say even go further and invest in new curriculum, new accelerated courses, new after-school programs, whatever, as well as green spaces. The Green Party candidate, I'm a big advocate of open park space, building more parks, making the city more livable, more desirable, more breathable. Thank you.
So in this case, you're in favor of a TIF?
Well, I mean, we're not going to eliminate TIFs overnight.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the next question then, randomly selected here. Number 8 on my list. Oops, sorry about that. And the order of response will be Mr. O'Donnell, Mr. Jacks, Mr. Reichel, then Mr. Pewar. How will you make certain that residents are informed about possible zoning changes and that you receive authentic input from residents and community members into these decisions? Are you willing to state for the record that you will refuse to approve block-busting upzoning in residential areas of the 47th Ward? Mr. O'Donnell.
Well, the most important part of being an alderman is listening to your constituents. I would listen to my constituents, certainly on zoning changes. I'll be accessible, accountable, accepting my constituents' views and input above all else. There is a proposal for any change upzoning, you can be guaranteed there's going to be a community meeting, and we're going to discuss that, and we're going to come up with a consensus from that meeting, or meetings. But we will sit down together and we will figure it out. But we're not just going to upgrade or blockbust or whatever you think might happen. We're going to sit down and discuss it at a community meeting such as we're having here. That means, of course, that I'm against, there will be no high-density housing or strip malls or anything that would choke the neighborhood or increase the congestion of the traffic, compromise the aesthetics of our community. Thank you.
All right. Question on the community meetings. If you're using that as a method for decision making, is it majority rule, show of hands at the community meeting that decides?
Well, that's how we decide aldermen. I would say that yeah, I would look at it if there's real gridlock or real legitimate differences that I think have weight on both sides. I mean, let's face it. You're here as a public official, not just to count heads. You're here to represent, and I would like to see what maybe could be changed, or maybe not do it, or throw the plan out, or whatever the decision becomes. But it's got to be a consensus. I would look for a consensus.
Next is Mr. Jacks.
So I, again, would definitely reach out to the community as much as possible in the decision-making process. The process would begin by just contacting all the people who I feel would be affected by any sort of zoning change.